Hello, I'm Dr. Liz Bartman. I'm Director of Clinical Sciences here at EndoAxis, and thank you for joining me in this review of how stress can impact human health and human physiology. So I really became inspired to share this topic after reviewing an email that came across my inbox, and it comes from Medscape. And this was a commentary or review by a medical doctor. And I think the subject line says it all, right? Stress. Is this a new cancer risk factor? And it made me wonder, as a functionally trained doctor, we often do recognize that stress is a major implicator in a lot of disease physiology and pathology. And what struck me was, here is a medical doctor who's really starting to recognize that as well. And it's because of several studies that have recently come out revealing just how much stress really does impact cell behavior and DNA expression. So from this doctor, I'm just going to read the first intro to this article briefly here. He's, again, Dr. Wilson, a medical doctor in the public health space. And he says, when you think about cancer, what comes to mind first? And he says, the first thing I think about is lifestyle, smoking, alcohol intake, being overweight, etc. Then I think about genetics, and I think about bad luck, the random chance and cosmic rays hitting the wrong segments of DNA, and so forth. But one thing I don't really think about, and I wonder if you do, is stress. And that hit me hard, right? Because I was reading that and thinking, well, yes, all of those factors that he's pondering really do impact risk for cancer, but of course, stress impacts that risk as well. And I wanted to dive into why that might be, because maybe there are some of you watching that this could be a new question or concern for you. And he's really what sparked his interest, Dr. Wilson's interest in this topic, was a study out of JAMA. And it was reviewing 4 different types of stressors and their impact on both the expression, but also progression of breast cancer in Black populations and white populations of women who had been diagnosed with breast cancer in this past year. And the way the article breaks down the stressors, they're looking at prolonged daily stress, and this includes perceived stressors. They're looking at racial discrimination and the impact that has on stress level and human physiology. They're looking at social isolation, as well as neighborhood deprivation. And these are stressors based on your surrounding environment, right? Do you live near a freeway? Do you live near factories or near chemical plants or in areas where you don't have access to clean drinking water or clean air? These are all elements of stress that are impacting the body. But what the study really showed was, yes, the environmental and psychosocial elements of stress truly do impact the cell's ability to replicate appropriately. That said, the mental emotional stressors really had profound impact on both populations as well. So we cannot underestimate the power of the mind and the power of perceived stress and what that does to our bodies. And why might that be? Well, just a brief reminder of what happens when we do perceive stress. Number 1, our brain receives a stress signal. And this could be from an acute stressor, like, oh, we need to run from a bear, right? Or it could be a perceived stress, like I have a work deadline coming up, or, oh, I have to work with this colleague who I really, am stressing about having to meet today, or I have a really hard conversation to have with a friend, right? You're not in the stress yet, but you're perceiving that the stress is about to come, right? Those have just as profound an impact on health as the acute stressor of running from a bear or of illness or of injury. So what happens when we have these stressors? Well, the brain sends a signal of CRH to our pituitary, which is releasing ACTH, which is that hormone, that peptide hormone that basically knocks on the adrenals and says, hey, we're under stress. Time to kick out some adaptive responsive hormones. So the generation from the adrenal glands is to make both adrenaline, epinephrine, but also cortisol. Cortisol is our master stress hormone. Well, what is cortisol doing in our body? It does a lot of things. And this is a very simplified graphic of what it's doing in the human body. But number 1, whenever I think cortisol high, I think, well, it's trying to get us again to safety. It's trying to get us away from the bear. So what does that do to the physiologic response or cellular adaptation to that stress? Number 1, it kicks up gluconeogenesis. This is a process of creating sugar. right? So cortisol hits the liver and says, we need to get sugar liberated right now. So it's liberating from the tissues, it's breaking down tissues to pull out sugars so that we can get the fuel source we need to run from that bear. Now, the tissues that do not require insulin are the brain, the eyes, the nervous system, and the kidneys. This is why with diabetic patients, these are the tissues that get damaged the most and show symptoms early on in disease progression, right? We get peripheral neuropathies, that stocking glove neuropathy that we see in diabetics. Their eyes start to fail. They're more prone to glaucoma and cataracts. Alzheimer's dementia, now being called type 3 diabetes, right? Because of that sugar response, that glycogen activity and oxidative stress in the brain. They're also at greater risk for kidney failure, right? Because those tissues do not require insulin to regulate sugar. So when we're under stress, it's equally important that we really be mindful about sugars because those tissues, they have to pull in that sugar. Why, right? What are they doing it for? Well, the brain's pulling in sugars so that it can start to stimulate neurotransmitters so that we can focus and run from that bear, right? And think clearly and get out of trouble. That sugar is also going to our eyes so we can get that refined and really targeted vision so that we can find and survey our surroundings and again, find safety and escape the danger. Kidneys pull in that sugar so that we can ramp up angiotensin, so we can pump out our blood pressure and get our heart rate going so that we have the volume and the pressure to get our muscles going, to get us out of danger, right? And then our nervous system, of course, our nerves are sucking up that sugar so that we can get those fast twitch active muscles so that we can, punch and fight and escape, right? The acute danger. Well, although this is the response we have, and it works really well to run from a bear, unfortunately, we're not all running from a bear every day. And our perceived stressors, our daily psychological stressors, our psychosocial stressors, these are all triggering the exact same response in the body, with the one caveat that we don't get to run it off. We're not burning off this sugar. We're not putting this energy to use to fight or flight. We are simply sitting in it and letting that sugar just bathe our cells, right? And that can increase risk for fatty liver disease. That can increase risk for insulin resistance, for kidney disease, for brain fog, for increased anxiety and insomnia, because now our adrenaline pathway is just in this heightened state of reactivity. What else is cortisol doing? It's augmenting our immune response. So we get these immune cells that are really good at attacking non-self and keeping us safe in case we were to get bit and had a foreign invader attack our bodies, right? Like we can fight that infection. We can heal quickly. Our platelets go up. We get more clotting factors. We get more blood vessel formation. We get this angiogenesis, right? So all these blood vessels start to create little new networks so that we can get blood flow to our tissues to get out of danger. At the same time, immune cells that help regulate response and calm the immune system and increase the anti-inflammatory response get blunted because we need to be in a pro-inflammatory state, right? And so that then increases our risk for maladaptive immune behavior. That can throw off our gut behavior and our gut health. That can really do a number on how we're clotting, right? And how we're protecting our bodies. So when we're thinking about, well, these are all things that are happening in order to protect us from this acute threat, and yet here we don't have an acute threat, and yet these things are still happening, how is that then translating into increased risk for other disease? Well, like I said already, fatty liver disease goes up when that blood sugar is constantly being triggered for formation. We can form leptin resistance, and we can start to get that cortisol belly, right? That increased adiposity because our cells are like, well, we've got to store, we've got to protect, right? In case this threat really does come to fruition. We get increased risk for brain fog, for anxiety, for insomnia. But with all of that neovascularization, all of that aberrant cell behavior and cell regulation, what the study showed is, hey, guess what? You're also at greater risk for maladaptive cell response. And when a cell doesn't know that it is damaged enough that it has to go into that apoptosis state, when that P53 and tumor necrosis factor just are not working, we start getting overt replication of damaged tissues, and that is cancer. And now we have all of this increased blood flow. So now not only is the tumor at greater risk for forming and growing faster, it also is at greater risk for spreading throughout the body. So you can really start to see how stress really is quite damaging to our tissues and quite damaging to our body and our cell response. And what's great about that study is it actually looks at a lot of the epigenetic programs and a lot of the genes that are getting turned on or turned off inappropriately in those acute stress situations, again, leading to greater maladaptive cell turnover and cell response and behavior. What else is that strong cortisol surge doing in our bodies? Well, it actually damages our brain quite a bit. We know that gray matter starts to decline the more cortisol exposure we have. And our prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that's all about higher rationalization, thinking things through, processing those stressful situations in an adaptive, coherent way, that tissue starts to atrophy. That tissue starts to shrink a little. And so we get almost into these states of reactivity, right? And that's that anxiety, that's that depression, even insomnia, because the brain just can't shift through those stressors as well. And so the more cortisol we are exposed to, the greater those changes in the brain become. And this has been shown in study after study as well. So where does EndoAxis come into all of this? We actually have 26 formulas, and we numbered them instead of titled them because they are addressing enzymatic activity, not symptoms. So it's really hard to give a product a title if what it's doing is not symptom control, but rather enzymatic regulation and supporting all the facets that could be influenced negatively if certain hormones are out of balance. So I really want to draw your attention to our optimized line. These are our products that are supporting the adrenals and supporting that cortisol response. And I want to really highlight and focus particularly on Formula 16 here. So Formula 16, it is our acute stress blend. It's for those really high cortisol states, but it can be chronic cortisol as well. If you have patients that are just under high amounts of stress, that are really struggling to calm their minds, that are struggling with weight, that are struggling with blood sugar and blood pressure abnormalities despite healthy eating, exercise, because they're just under a lot of stress, right? And they just can't help control that stressor. Outside of the mind-body therapies and techniques that you really should be incorporating, you can also incorporate this product. And what really helps 16 stand apart from all other cortisol blends out there on the market, number one, it's really focusing on that cellular damage. It's packed full of antioxidants that are helping our cells restore that P53 response and that appropriate cell turnover. We have nutrients and herbs that are reducing inflammation, balancing immune health, and regulating blood sugars. We also include, of course, calming adaptogenic herbs, as well as nootropics, because remember that cortisol response to the brain is really going to have a stronger negative impact on cognition, on mood, on mental health, and can help or can cause, right, the spiraling and the propagation of that perceived stress. So one thing to always remember whenever I work with stress management with my patient population, stress exists no matter what, right? And it's important because a little stress, it's like a fire. A little stress is like a campfire that keeps us warm. We just don't want to burn down the entire forest. We don't want it to get out of control, right? And we can't always control the stressors, but we can control the way we think about the stress. And so we want to incorporate those mind-body tools, meditation, deep breathing, even just being outside in nature, or taking deep belly breaths every hour or two throughout the day just to reset that nervous system. But in tandem, you can give a product like Formula 16 that will support the patient in their healing journey and really help restore that HPA axis and stress response. So just to call out in what's in this blend, we have that vitamin C, which is so critical for adrenal function, for hormone synthesis within that adrenal tissue, but also a potent antioxidant. We have pyridoxal 5-phosphate, the active form of B6, which is really good for the nervous system. It helps calm and improve GABA response as well. Pantothenic acid, another B vitamin, really concentrated within that adrenal tissue. And of course, magnesium. But magnesium is a very bulky mineral. And if we put a ton of magnesium into a product, the concern is it can actually block absorption of other nutrients in that blend. So when we're using our minerals in our blends, we use them in more of a hormetic response. We want to give enough to coax the right response along, but not enough to block or inhibit the primary herbs and antioxidants within the formulation. So I always like to give my bulky minerals separate and away from other product, because I want to maximize their absorption, but I also don't want them to compete with the therapeutic intent of other blends that I may be prescribing. And again, we get so much magnesium from a lot of our foods and nutrition that we just need those cofactor doses a lot of the time to really support the role of that formula as a whole. Sugars. We also include, of course, calming adaptogenic herbs, as well as nootropics, because remember that cortisol response to the brain is really going to have a stronger negative impact on cognition, on mood, on mental health, and can help or can cause, right, the spiraling and the propagation of that perceived stress. So one thing to always remember whenever I work with stress management with my patient population, stress exists no matter what, right? And it's important because a little stress, it's like a fire. A little stress is like a campfire that keeps us warm. We just don't want to burn down the entire forest. We don't want it to get out of control, right? And we can't always control the stressors, but we can control the way we think about the stress. And so we want to incorporate those mind-body tools, meditation, deep breathing, even just being outside in nature, or taking deep belly breaths every hour or two throughout the day just to reset that nervous system. But in tandem, you can give a product like Formula 16 that will support the patient in their healing journey and really help restore that HPA axis and stress response. So just to call out in what's in this blend, we have that vitamin C, which is so critical for adrenal function, for hormone synthesis within that adrenal tissue, but also a potent antioxidant. We have pyridoxal 5-phosphate, the active form of B6, which is really good for the nervous system. It helps calm and improve GABA response as well. Pantothenic acid, another B vitamin, really concentrated within that adrenal tissue. And of course, magnesium. But magnesium is a very bulky mineral. And if we put a ton of magnesium into a product, the concern is it can actually block absorption of other nutrients in that blend. So when we're using our minerals in our blends, we use them in more of a hormetic response. We want to give enough to coax the right response along, but not enough to block or inhibit the primary herbs and antioxidants within the formulation. So I always like to give my bulky minerals separate and away from other product, because I want to maximize their absorption, but I also don't want them to compete with the therapeutic intent of other blends that I may be prescribing. And again, we get so much magnesium from a lot of our foods and nutrition that we just need those cofactor doses a lot of the time to really support the role of that formula as a whole. We also have a little bit of chromium, just a little drop dosing, in order to regulate that glucose and insulin response. And then we get into the herbs. So we include holy basil, and holy basil is just such a lovely, calming, adaptogenic herb. It's going to regulate that HPA axis response, but it also, I think of it as like the volume control in the brain. It can help just calm that stress response and really provide more of that Zen state to the body. Bacopa is a nootropic herb, but it has an adaptogenic influence. So it is an Ayurvedic herb. It's used for longevity. It's used for brain health predominantly. But what they're finding in the research and literature is that Bacopa really does help regulate cortisol response as well. And specifically, it's supporting that hypothalamic regulation of stress in the brain. And it's regulating that oxidative potential of cortisol in the tissues of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, to help ensure that we have better BDNF response, we have better acetylcholine, better focus and concentration, and better response of the prefrontal cortex, that we don't have that atrophy that we see with high cortisol over prolonged windows of time. We also included berberine. And berberine is there because of that blood sugar response. It's protecting the liver from that high cortisol activity. It's also regulating insulin response at a cellular level. But on top of that, it's supporting our immune system and it's anti-inflammatory. So many roles that herb plays in this blend as well. We also include myo-inositol, and that again is for that blood sugar regulation, but myo-inositol also supports GABA. So it can be anxiolytic and be very calming. Of course, we have phosphatidylserine. This is a metabolizer of cortisol, right? So this is just going to help with that high cortisol surge, ensure that we can get it back down to a regular state more efficiently so that high cortisol isn't pulsating through our bodies all day, chronically, wreaking havoc on all of our tissues. And this is a branded ingredient of magnolia bark and philodendron. Wonderful herb, again, for that calming response, GABA activity in the brain, serotonin, just very anxiolytic, very supportive and nutritive in those high stress states. And of course, this all blend without ashwagandha. Ashwagandha is anti-inflammatory, it's anti-aging. There's so many roles it plays in the body. It's regulating the thyroid adrenal response, but it's also really supporting, again, that hypothalamic activity to stress and ensuring that we don't get a resistance to stress signals over time. Because that can happen as well, where the brain's like, well, if we're going to be under stress this long, we're just not going to make as much ACTH. The knock is going to be diminished. And over time, you can see that decline in cortisol, not because we can't make cortisol, but because the brain's like, whoa, enough's enough. And ashwagandha ensures it's really targeting that hypothalamic activity to ensure that we have that regulated HPA response over time. We have some chamomile, just very soothing, very calming, but also very supportive to the gut. And remember, the other thing that happens when we're in that fight or flight state, our gut slows down. We don't have as rapid a gastric emptying because we're not in digestion right now. We don't need to digest if we're running from a bear, right? We do that later when we rest. So the chamomile is allowing us to get into that parasympathetic state, supporting the vagus nerve, but also supporting digestion. So it's really giving us that full circle of all the areas, all the elements of stress that are impacted by that high cortisol, lowering the cortisol, supporting the tissues. And of course, we have that taurine, which is just such a lovely steroid sulfation aid in the liver, great for biliary health, but also very neuroadaptive and calming to the nervous system. So that is our Formula 16. That is a brief synopsis of why we want to care about stress and what stress really can do at a cellular level. Not only is it wreaking havoc on our blood sugars, our liver, our adipose, our brain, but now it may also be a driver of that cellular maladaptive response that could propagate and worsen outcomes of cancer. So always address our patients full circle, right? It's all systems, all act together. And when we're supporting and targeting, we do lifestyle, we do mind-body support, and then we can add in Formula 16 to any patient dealing with that either acute stressors or that chronic response to stress over time that just needs to turn the volume down on their brain, that just needs to get more into that relaxed state, support more of that parasympathetic response. Thank you so much for taking a listen. I hope this helps give some insight into other ways to target and support your patients.